Now, Cecilia, you talked about inclusivity, especially on digital space. I've heard what others have said, but one thing that people have not talked about is to ensure the laws are followed. You know, we have the Cyberbullying Act that no one talks about it. We've never heard in any country that someone has been sentenced to jail because of cyberbullying. And if it has happened, it's not on public domain. So I feel at some point, let us have that one person who will serve as an example. Let us ask our question, why did President, or rather the former President Uhuru Kenyatta left Twitter? It is because of cyberbullying. And the question is, what are we doing for people who left, for them to feel inclusive in the digital space? So we need to ask these questions. Why did they leave in the first place? Now, after answering that, then what does the law say about the same? Do we have people who have been accused, or rather reported, and the law has taken its course over the same? If yes, we need to see the examples. If no, then someone somewhere is sleeping on his work.
Maybe I have something just to under a minute. Oh, I'll use what is on me.
A tweet.
Yeah. Uganda has precedents. You wondered if at all there are any. Uganda has precedents of cases that have happened, and cyberbullying by the Computer Misuse Act. And I think the one that is so much in the international space is that of Dr. Stella Nyanzi versus State, when she was prosecuted on things to do with Computer Misuse Act, but then really inclining to cyberbullying. But then we have also others. But the problem of implementation of these laws is they are politicized in nature when it comes to their implementation. Actually, from development to implementation, it is all political. That laws are developed. That's why you're seeing that as African countries, we are having so many laws being developed. But because they are developed on grounds of serving political agendas, even their implementation, the law is only pulled out when it is politically targeted. That is the only problem. And I think it points out what I said earlier, that we need to advocate, and from an intersectional perspective, as civil society, as journalists, as diverse actors, to see that laws in our respective countries, one, we have domestication of international principles that deal with inclusivity of women, or enabling that women thrive in new technologies and their emerging challenges, and media at large. And the second bit of it, for the laws that are available in the country, can they be engendered? We have digital rights laws, but they are generic. Now, when we have a society that has a marginalized group as us women who are suffering most, the implementation of this law becomes very tricky. We have been in a room of stakeholders, at least back then in Uganda, from policy enforcement, policy not meaning policy, but legal enforcement bit of it. And they really speak on grounds of, but you women, like, you want everything to be about you. Those are the kind of statements that come out. You get it? But you're saying you want everything to be about us all around, from government and your implementation of agendas. And yet when government, you're coming out, you need something, it's very immediate and targeted. So there are precedents that we have, at least as a country, Uganda, even when it's not good to speak, we do have them. Yes.
I think I will touch on laws. Around the world, so many, the law is yet to catch up with technology. For example, when we give Kenya Computer Misuse Act, Section 27 talks about cyber harassment, but it doesn't define what is cyber harassment. It doesn't contextualize the crime. And when you look at it properly, it's actually leaning on infringing of freedom of expression. And that's why I think it's how we talked about, or it's you who talked about working in silos. We are actually working in silos because civil society is working on its own, the government is working on its own. Of course, media is also doing it on. So when they end up creating laws which are actually not working properly, sometimes actually to tick a box, then there is a problem there. So I would also talk about the language that is used in law. Sometimes when you read those things, personally, and I'm a journalist, I'm supposed to read and interpret it for the common man. It's it's jargon. So if I don't understand it, how am I going to make Wanjiku? Wanjiku is a term we use to refer to the common person here. Like, how will Wanjiku be able to understand it? Also, language is very key. So to Philip's point, Philip, you talked about most of the things that are created from the Western world, and then they are thrown at us. You know, like, oh, here is a tool. It's called so and so. Use it. It helps you hide your location. But I just also want to float a question to the room. What about our innovativeness as a continent? Because how many products are we consuming that are from this continent? And I think we also have this mentality that when it's African, it must be something wrong with it. Sorry to say. It's the same thing. We read international authors, including myself. You know, Obama releases a book. I start Googling when it's going to be in Kenya. You know, and then I come to this room, Bonita has written a book. I'm like, oh, in my head, Bonita, did you have to write a book? We can actually Google what you wrote, you know. So how can we also encourage innovativeness in this continent? Because we need human-centered design. For an internet to be inclusive, it has to be human-centered, you know. And you talked local content, and it applies to everything. So how can we also encourage innovativeness in this continent? Anyone?
Thank you very much. My name is Bonaventure. I think one issue that we are not looking at is the role of academia in this whole space. In the curriculum we have for all these universities, which courses, which programs talk about innovativeness, digital resilience, and all this? Are we waiting for this disease to happen and we train people, sensitize and do that? Or should we do it before it happens? You say it was your first time to experience it. Maybe if you are taught in school all on your own, you would be aware of how to tackle this. So I think we should involve academia in this. But of course we have to understand not everyone is in school. So how do we reach these other people outside there? Can we ensure that we talk to the local authorities, the market authorities, where these other people are not in school? Then also one thing that is very, very important is how can we involve the perpetrators? Because they are not changing. They are the same people. So can we look for them and maybe sensitize them or do something? So I think in that way we can be able to tackle the disease.
But now the question is, how do you get a perpetrator who uses a pseudo account on Facebook?
Yeah, that's the challenge with that. But
thank you. I think I have so many things to say, but let me start with how do we get innovative and how do we involve the academy? Because I'm from the academy. Here at Aga Khan, I think there are a number of things we do. We have a Media Innovation Center, which is powered by research. So a lot of things that we do are basically anchored on empirical findings as far as innovation is concerned. But how do we scale up innovation? You know, you've aptly say that when it is from Africa, the uptake is not, you know, encouraging because we associate anything from Africa as being less innovative. But what we've seen, especially in the media startups that have come up with very innovative ways of telling stories, moving beyond, you know, the first 4 W's of who, what, where, and when to the last W and H of why and how. And we've supported enough innovative media outlets in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, which we can speak of. There's the bank in Kenya, there's the bank in Uganda, there's Afya Tunes in Tanzania, there's Hamisa Media in Tanzania, and they are doing amazing things. But this is what I would say about innovation. How do we create an ecosystem that would support the innovative ideas? So how many people, for instance, are alive to the innovations that we have around the East African region? And how do we scale that up? How do we talk about the innovative ideas that are changing the landscape, that are shifting gender norms, you know, stereotypes that we have, and just have that conversation, elevate the innovative ideas in Africa? But the challenge with innovation, because we've been in this space, is resources. How do we channel resources to innovation? You know, because as most folks will tell you in the media, the problem with investing in training, innovation, and all that is that the immediate returns are non-existent. So you won't reap from innovation immediately, and then you're in an environment where revenues are dwindling. So what would you rather do? Do you cut costs, or do you invest in more innovations that would even, take more cash without immediate returns? But we did a study on state of innovation and media viability in East Africa, and this is what we found out, that for most media houses that invest in training and innovation, their revenues reduce, their financial status are poor in the succeeding financial year. But for a long stretch of time, what happens is that their revenues increase. So how do we use such kind of evidence to tell them that investment in training and innovation may affect your balance sheet in the next financial year, in the current financial year where you are investing, but in subsequent years, it will draw some additional revenues that would position your media house or whatever it is in a better space? But from all these conversations, one thing that we may want to be alive to is that we talk about technology, how to make the tech space safe, but you're not talking about the human being behind technology. I don't know whether you guys know that most of the big tech companies, the largest percentage of their employees are not tech people, they're anthropologists. Go to Facebook, go to Google, go to it's called what? Apple. Majority of their employees are actually people who've done cultural anthropology. Why? Because for you to use that technology, they need to understand your way of life and understand it completely. Now, for us to harness the opportunities inherent in the digital space, the future of work, we have to find a way of harnessing those opportunities while mitigating the challenges. So we cannot mitigate the challenges without talking about the people who occasion these challenges. It is us people. It is us guys. And if it is bad right now, I think it will be worse for our kids. Why? Because you're not training them. You're not telling them that, you know what, you're born in the digital age. You're digital natives. Now, these are the opportunities. These are the risks. Are we raising them as people who will be faceless behind technology? I doubt. But that is it. Are we raising a generation that understands that if you're going to attack people on the digital platform because you are anonymous, you're creating a culture where anonymous people will be cruel to all of us, including you. So bottom line of what my argument is, investment in innovation is fairly expensive. We need to be very deliberate in channeling resources. And this is because the returns are not immediate. And then number two, now we may need to stop focusing on tech and focus on the people. Someone mentioned about, disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation. I mean, those are very elite conversations that we have, But you see, they are very germane in the society. How do we tell people? How do we inculcate a culture where even my mother would know this is something that is in our WhatsApp group, but I need to consume it and stop the propagation of this because it is misinforming, and anyone who is unsuspecting might actually act on this information and it is not right. How do we inculcate some of these conversations into our curriculum so that from a very early age, people get to understand that not everything that you receive, is for your consumption and distribution. Maybe it is for your consumption and you get back to the person who is spreading it. And enough times you get into WhatsApp groups, you see disinformation and you do nothing about it. You do absolutely nothing. And it's many of us. So how do we just create a generation that would act and arrest acts of disinformation? How do you raise a generation that would deal with cyberbullying? Because how do you train people to start understanding that cyberbullying is bad from an early age? Because my kids got me into TikTok. And the things they download on my phone, some I don't even understand. But yet, we are not talking to them in their curriculum. They believe teachers more than parents. So in their curriculum, chances are no one has trained those teachers, on some of these things that we are discussing here. But those are the people raising our kids. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And a very interesting angle, innovation, which we are not looking at. And you talked about human beings. She was talking about AI. The other day I attended a class on AI, and an algorithm is just an opinion by someone. You know, so we're not looking at human beings. Our mind are just fixated on this tech, which is created by a very few people. And that's why we keep saying AI, there's so many aspects of AI that are racist. That is a first thing, you know, because the people who are feeding these codes are people who that is part of their lives, sorry to say so. So how also as Africans, how are we going to get involved? I said it before, anything that is African, we start having doubts about it. And it could be such an amazing aspect. But because it has been created by a certain Kenyan or a certain Ugandan, I'm like, but when I hear somebody from San Francisco who doesn't look like me has created something, I jump on it because I believe it is the best. So also it brings in the issue of how do we bring trust to ourselves? You know, those kids we're talking about, you talked about your kids, and it's true, even right now you tell a kid, no, this is spelled like this. No, my teacher told me it is spelled like this. And that's it, because it came from their teacher. Also, how do we develop trust in ourselves? You know, because when we develop trust in ourselves, then the innovation that we create can be able to be used by our people. You know, because we are not going to keep waiting and waiting for everything to come from the West so that we can be able to use it and fall on it. I'm sure there are people who have such amazing idea on even a social media app, but because they're from here now. But Threads came the other day and now they have 100 million subscribers. You know why? Zuckerberg is involved, you know. Instagram, because they're all part of the Meta family. So how do we get that into our culture, especially people like you who are in education, who you're nurturing young talents who are going to take over the space before we know it?
It has something to do about innovation and still promoting African values. And I think it is necessary for everyone in the space. Yes, we're speaking about women, but it's also necessary for us to, as much as we're trying to educate, you know, empower women. I think the moment where the bias will break is for a man to not feel weird that there's a woman that's sitting on the same table with him, you know, and doing big stuff. That's number one. The bias would break from there. But where am I going to with this conversation is this. It's also, there's need for us, as whether you're in tech, whether you're a writer, to also inculcate the African value in every product you put out there. Because if we are going to trust, even as much as we say, oh, Facebook and all of these big guys, we're still clamoring for ours. So we were talking yesterday and we said something about we need to start, as much as we are doing the natural language processing thing or the natural language products that they use with AI, we also need to consider the African language AI. That is, I want to translate something from Swahili or from English to Swahili so that someone can be comfortable with it, to use it. I should not come to a place or a space and I must talk to maybe Siri with English. I should be able to converse with that kind of app or the product with my language. So you as a tech person would make me trust that space when I can feel comfortable using my own language. Also, as a writer, even as much as I put stuff out there in English, you must be able to break the bias that it sounds like you are living in my town. So I see writers, you're probably living in Nigeria, and you're writing a story, maybe that happened yesterday, and you're just using picked data. You're not actually doing a lot of ground truthing. So your story does not even look real. So for example, I do stuff with data, but as much as they say these big guys, I still don't trust because I see a lot of overshoots with the numbers. So even as much as we think that people trust or they want to use this international, our guys are still seeking, they are clamoring for the local, those that actually know them. So my point is, as a writer, as a tech person, you would only make people comfortable with this space
when they can see consistent truths in what you put out there. So you're writing, you are not there. So I can sense it if I'm there from your write-up, that this is just a statement from outside or a generic data you're using. That already that's a trigger for me. So I'm probably not going to come to your platform for a while till I can find that there's a consistent truth on this page. Also, your product as a technical person, if you're going to do something innovative, if I also realize that I can't find, like I think cartoons now, those that are doing cartoons now, they're trying to also use black people for the animations. And what are they trying to do? They're trying to buy our trust. They're trying to get us comfortable with that space. So I would say consistency and also staying truthful with your data and what you put out there. As far as people can be comfortable with your product, they find their skin, they find their language, they can relate with it, seem like it's the truth. I believe at some point we are going to have to stop, because we need it. So people will get comfortable with it. People need it. So at the longer run, they will get comfortable with it. So I've just said truth, consistency, and a lot of relatable products.
Oh, thank you so much. There's someone next to you before. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Ashley. I wanted to add, I think the algorithms don't favor us as Africans because they have collected our data for a while. Remember, this technology is from the Western world. So they have collected our data, and from the algorithms, they know, they can predict based on patterns. They can predict this is what they would want. This is what, so us, the first measure that I would advise is we prevent further data collection. We do it objectively. I mean, you're collecting my data. Yes, you're asking for this information so that I get that. But where is this going? Because we give them with the trust that, we're going to get this service. But then again, it could be used to create those apps that we're saying we cannot innovate. But it's not that we do not know, it's we do not have the patterns. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. You had something to add on before we move to the next question?
I just want to add the aspect of to build trust, you need to work with a community, because most of the time we have technologists who sit in their labs. They create, for example, an application and just put it out there. It does not work well like that in Africa. What needs to happen, or what has happened well, is that you build the application within a community, meaning that you work from the human-centered design in a community so that you have people that are going to begin using the app or testing it, and that's how it's going to grow in terms of usability. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. For example, you can have a community in Kenya that starts using the app, starts seeing results, having the success stories, and then we promote the app and people start using it. So that's how I see it.
Thank you so much. The issue of usability. Also, there is a question of at what point do you involve the community? Because you're trying to create what we call a human-centered design. At what point do you involve the community? After you create it or before you create it? There is also that question. Anyway, so I would also want to pose to my panelists, what are some of the success stories, case studies, best practices in digital resilience? Because I know they're there. It is not all hope lost. So what are some of the case studies and what can we copy from them to keep this trend going?
In the African continent, especially around I work with journalists from the SADC region and some in Uganda, some in Tanzania and all that. Some of the best practices we've been using in terms of being safe on the digital platforms. Anyway, sometimes we use phones, just phones to make a phone call. Rather than using WhatsApp, which you don't know whether it's encrypted or not. So we just make a phone call, and or when we use encrypted email, or we use, or sometimes if we feel our conversations really need a lot of secrecy, when we have other forums, we meet and discuss our issues physically at times. We may not have our own innovations, but hopefully as we progress further, I'm sure they'll come, because they come with their own challenges. We really rely mostly on the Western technologies in terms of making our digital spaces safe. I haven't seen any in the journalism sector that is locally based. I haven't seen any, to be honest. But we just try our best using those technologies, using our own tech people. Like my publication, I have a tech guy who every time I keep working with him, asking them, do you feel our publication is secure? What can I do? He's our local technician, but I keep talking to him so that he's involved in the process. Because if my website is attacked by a malware and all that, you see, we'll be compromised, our data will be lost. So I keep working together with him. And even when trainings come, I make sure he attends so that he's able, he's not just a tech guy, but he understands the audience we are dealing with. Because when he just says, I'm a tech guy, and then he doesn't really interact with the audience, he doesn't really interact with the journalists, so he'll put a barrier. But when he interacts with all these people within the publication or within the journalism sector, he'll be able to know the people he's dealing with. He'll be able to project even the threats that are coming on board. Yeah.
Okay, to you, Brenda, what are some of the success stories or case studies, and what can we borrow from it?
Okay, so in Uganda, I would love to be very specific. During last year, we worked with policy under the first phase of the Future of Work, where we did, when I say we, I mean Uganda Media Women's Association. We did capacity building of female journalists on digital safety and security, whereby through this we enhanced their skills and knowledge to respond to threats that may arise in the digital spaces, but elements to do with data protection and privacy. We did not stop at only that particular bit of it within our programming. We realized that while we were training, largely building capacity and actually advocacy, we hinged on gender-based violence, the physical part of it. And we had to cope with the realization that, look here, there is a monster. And at UMA, we call it a silent monster, which has translated onto the online space. And so in 2021, we developed, 2020-2021, we developed something that we call Mission 2025. Where under this statement, it is somewhat of a statement or a strategy that we developed, and this drew towards having collective efforts, synergizing efforts as media rights organizations, women rights organizations, government actors or authorities responsible to media, and media management. Then media actors themselves, particularly the practitioners, female journalists, to build resiliency towards responding to both offline and online threats that arise within the practice of media. Not only stopping at female journalists, we looked at the woman who exists within media. Now we start with ourselves because we are the frontiers, we are the battlefront. And then we looked at now the woman, any other woman who may exist either by using or having visibility in the media space, and media is both online and offline. So through this, we are implementing, diversely implementing across our programs to see that every time we do a form of capacity building, it has to speak to Mission 2025, and that's the element of resilience. And then if you're speaking to Mission 2025, it's the intersectional approach, that when we are going to do the capacity building, it is not individual or institutional to UMA, but then we are bringing on board diverse actors so that they can collectively speak to this broad spectrum of the problem which is perpetrated. When we come to the level of advocacy, and that has strongly helped, which I really think that it should be a lesson that should be carried on, but then also learned, yes, to stop speaking in silos. Then we come to the advocacy part of it. We realize that through the capacity building, we train, but this continues. What is the problem? And then there was the issue, Bonaventure spoke about the perpetrators, and he said, okay, the campaign. And then actually when you go to our website of OMA, you're going to find Mission 2025. And it particularly targets to take that message home to the perpetrator or any other actor. And we said, okay, we are sending out the message. And then we zero down to the workspace now, because the workspace is both physical, the newsroom, and then the digital news, which manifests with the digitalization of the newsrooms. And realize what is the problem. In workspaces of the media, there's limited or no existence of gender-specific policies which entail safety and security policies. And then this is where female journalists revealed to us that actually you train us, we have the skills, but then the skills, we cannot force them into the work that we are doing. At the end of the day, when I develop a story, you bring it into the newsroom. Of course, that is the workspace. Whether it has to be a digital news story or a physical news story, which is otherwise just going to be visualized on the digital spaces, there is the media management or ownership that speaks that this story must be selling in a certain angle of it. And certain angles are drivers of online violations or online threats towards practitioners. And then it gets up here. Please engage media management and ownership. So we start conversations with media management and ownership and realize that there is a reinforcement of issues to do with the business sense. How do we generate the sales? And through this, we say that, okay, the regulator, Uganda Communications Commission, Ministry of ICT, where is your hand in seeing that core regulatory mechanisms are put in place now when that comes to policy? And they say, but look here, we are tied because the laws are not specific to the needs that you're speaking to. In that process, as OMA, again, with other actors, synergizing efforts with other actors to come on board, we have started a process that is ongoing to see that we are speaking and very deliberate to see that the legal and regulatory framework within the country is engendered. What do we need in that engendering? Specification. Let's define that while we are speaking, we are having, the laws have to speak to the current trends also. That while in the previous we are speaking about GBV, gender-based violence, which was physical, we are getting now the online forms. Can we have some of these issues being, embedded within the law? If the law cannot be amended, can we have a policy or a guideline that is in place to see that enforcement is tripled down to the law so that the efforts speak to each other, that there is no room of failure? Then away from that, and that is a very key lesson which we are picking on and learning through the process. Away from that, as OMA, we are conducting capacity building of female journalists and then also social influencers to build their skills on technological application. But digitalization does not only stop at internet and presence within the internet. Technological gadget use. And this is very specific to investigative journalism that we are training them on. That if you do not have the knowledge and the skill to know what equipment you're supposed to use in what form of story sourcing, you expose yourself to threat. That is in the physical sense. But in the dissemination of this story as well, which is now evolved to the online space, how do you get to disseminate this story? So that you protect yourself from compromise of threat that may happen online or translate into a physical attack. And so we are doing this, and we hope that by the end of the year, in the selection of women journalists who are involved in investigative journalism, we hope that we would have built the capacity among them, one, to know technological use and coping up with different technological elements within the space of reporting in media, and particular to investigative or futuristic stories. And then the second bit of it is, again, the resilience in the digital space. How do you protect yourself? Yes.
Thank you. I hear you talking a lot about capacity building, which also I think policy has been doing an amazing job about it. And also you brought in a very interesting point. Media is business. Even these tech companies are in business. You are not their first priority. Sorry to tell you the truth. you're not their first priority. Their first priority is making money. Zuckerberg didn't start Facebook because he wanted you people to have a healthy conversation online. No, he started because he needed to make money. And sometimes they also like the chaos on their platform because it draws more traffic. So it goes to individual basis. The decisions that you make when you're online. That is what really counts. And also you talked about the laws, speaking in the current context, and also brings in the issue of political goodwill. We desperately need political goodwill for so many of these things to work out. And unfortunately, that is one thing that we are really struggling with. Mercy, I would come to you. Clearly, you are a story of digital resilience because you're still a journalist, you're still here. So what are some of the success stories that you have seen, or what best practices when it comes to digital resilience? Because your story is a clear case of digital resilience. Yes.
Thank you very much. And I'm already a success story, right? Yes. And a case study. So that means... I'm in a better place, right? But I feel at some point, just the way you've said, the media management, especially the mainstream media where we work, needs to be taught that good content sell. Because I've realized that most media houses, unlike the community or small media houses, most mainstream media actually, they glorify when someone is trending on negative sides because one, you're bringing the traffic, and two, the numbers are increasing, more businesses, and you know. So I feel at some point the management, the editors needs to be trained, fully trained. In fact, they should be here. Yes, to just be trained that you don't have to trend on negative things because I don't have nyash, but I can also trend because of my successes, the awards I've won, and also and actually bring the traffic of the, I mean, in the organization, you know. So I feel we lack trainings. It's much more of journalists being trained, but the management, the top, needs this information. And also, secondly, I feel we lack the gender desks. We lack guidance and counseling, because sometimes you find a journalist maybe coming from a community radio now to the mainstream media. Like for me, I told you the other day, I was baptized by fire, by force, by fire, that you need to go on air tomorrow without orientation, you know. If I were told that this is the audience, this is what you're going to get if you get on air, you know, I could have prepared myself psychologically. But I feel at some point we are always left to just figure it out, to just swim in that shark. Ukipatana nayo, it's okay. If you succeed, fine. If you die, that is your own, you know. So I feel we lack a gap between the management and the journalist. In between here, we need to have something. Either the guidance and counseling desk, the gender desk, where you need to go and report, this is what happened. I went to my HR and my HR told me, Madam, this is what is supposed to happen because we need numbers, you know? Yeah, so I feel at some point we lack that gap between that presenter up there and the management. So hapa katikati, you're on your own. And I feel this should actually be, the gap should be closed. Yes, through trainings and actually, much more of trainings and awareness, yes.
Back to you, Policy, because you have something to do. Talk about media management and training the media management themselves. Because when you look at trainings, most of the times, we have the journalists who are in the field. The management is not there because they feel that is not their job. So we also need to know how to close the gap. So anyway, as we always say here in Kenya or even in Tanzania, chenye mwanzo hakikosi mwisho. Whatever has a beginning must have an end. We have come to the end of our live podcast session. And today, I must say we had a very interactive discussion. The plan was to make sure that everyone on the table is able to air their view. We didn't want it to look like you are the audience and we are the ones speaking, because it's a conversation that involves everyone, and something that has really come out here, we need to stop speaking in silos. And that's what we were trying. We were preaching water and drinking water, not drinking wine, right, Phil? Yes. So thank you so much for joining us on this live podcast. We were discussing on innovative pathways to digital resilience for women at work. This live podcast was made possible by Policy.